Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today I have a special guest joining me today, photographer, documentarian of DC Culture, author of DC Go-Go, 10 Years Backstage. Please welcome Chip Pye. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm great. It's really great to be here.
Just like we were talking, you were spinning a yarn. So big points to you as we were, starting off this conversation. Since inherently Backstage has been a part of, a big chunk of your career, your life. So for those listeners who don't know you, don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself and really what brought you to the world of live music and specifically go-go?
Okay. My name's Chip Pye. I'm a photographer. The way in which I got into photography around the time I was 14 years old, my father got a camera because he was a newspaper reporter. And starting around that time, I would go with him on his assignments and take pictures for him. And eventually we ended up with a little dark room in the basement. And so I would go to play. And when we moved down to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, where I lived in high school and in college, he was a small town newspaper reporter, and we would chase fire trucks and shoot events like that. When I was in junior high school here in Bethesda, I booked bands into my junior high school auditorium and became a huge live music fan, and have been ever since. When I went to college at East Carolina University, I kind of combined the two and photographed bands, a lot of the 80s Mitch Easty bands that were coming through Eastern North Carolina at the time. I photographed those. When I moved up here to begin my grown-up life, I still shot local bands here. I shot pretty much a lot of scenes that are in DC, and DC is a music town. Punk rock started here. Okay, bluegrass had its huge. The top three bluegrass bands are located here in Washington D.C. The Seldom Seen, the Country Gentlemen. And same with rockabilly. Link Ray is a DC guy. There's tons and tons of, go into jazz and start talking about the great jazz musicians who are from DC. So I was shooting all of them. And at one point I had to say to myself, why are you doing this? And what do you want? And, it was my life's work at the time. And I wanted to have a complete view of what DC was at the time in which I was DC music, live music was. And somebody had told me one time that DC was the second live music town because of go-go. I'm sorry, DC was the second live music town to New Orleans because of DC go-go. And I was like, go-go? I knew Chuck Brown, so I knew that in order to make my work complete, I was going to have to start shooting go-go. And I thought all I needed was a picture of Chuck Brown, and I thought I'd be in and out and get that done in the next month. And I ended up walking into a scene that was, Chuck Brown was important, and I actually became his photographer shortly after that. Go-go is much more vibrant. It's much more than just Chuck Brown's band. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of bands who have played go-go in the last 50 years. And so what I thought was going to be 4 weeks turned into 10 years.
Wow. Thank you for giving us that kind of overview and that background there. And I'm checking through of different questions. I was like, all right, Chip has touched on that. Well, let me remove that.
Let's get this format out the window.
So tell me about. So this is a question that I have, and I think our quirks, our strangeness, if you will, is what makes us really good at what we do. Like I'm inquisitive by nature. I like asking people questions and learning new things. So that's, I guess, what makes me a good interviewer, quote unquote.
Yes, I
don't know if I'm a good interviewer. I'm a bad interviewer. I don't know. Do you embrace your strangeness, those qualities that make you unique to, being a photographer, being a documentarian? And what would you say those traits about yourself are?
Well, one of the things, I dedicated this book to my father, who's no longer with us. And one of the things that he always taught me to do was the thing I got from there. I didn't get anything financially from the man, but he taught me how to explore, and I'm always exploring. My neighbor last night asked me how I knew. He found a bird that he thought was ill, and I was like, "No, that's a bird that just got kicked out of his net. It's fledgling." And he looked at me and said, "How do you know anything about birds?" And I'm like, "Well, because I watched them. I always explored things." Okay, I fish on the Upper Potomac for smallmouth bass, but floating down that river on my boat, I'm going to tell you all about all of the Civil War history and all the history that went on that river, because I have explored it. I'm always looking for things to explore, and it changes throughout my lifetime. And so we moved every year of my life because my father was a reporter who couldn't keep a job, and so one of the things I got, the quirkiness of my behavior, is that I am comfortable being where I am with new people all the time, because that was just my life growing up. So when I decided to become one of a very few white people in go-go, I did not have fear of that, even though people actually told me not to go do this, and I feel comfortable in any room, and I felt comfortable in go-go doing what I was doing. And I made friends there, and I wasn't afraid of any room that I would walk in. So yeah, I'm very comfortable around. I hate the word strangers, but I'm very comfortable around people I don't know, and I get to know them. And so that was very keen. That was very helpful in what I was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that naturally translates to being a documentarian, remembering things like you were saying, like you could be on your boat and it's like, I know what happened here and all here, I know the history of this. And I'm generally not, and I'm not gassing you up here. Generally, I'm very in awe of people who just have that. Like, yeah, I know what happened here. I remember this. Like, the history of this place. It's like, yeah, tell me more.
I drank myself out of a history degree at East Carolina University, and spent 30+ year career in advertising. But I'm really glad right now that I'm doing the work of a historian. One thing to note is not only did I publish this book earlier this year, but the DC Public Library acquired my entire catalog of work that I did in go-go in order to have the history of go-go preserved. And while I wasn't in go-go in the 70s and in the 80s, there isn't another catalog like that. And so the importance of my work was verified by the DC Public Library. And then with that, I was able to go get this book done. And in April, my work was featured in Rolling Stone. I was the featured photographer during the month of April with my work in go-go. And so I have achieved what I always drank away, the opportunities as a historian. So I'm very much proud of that, and I'm very much enjoying my life right now.
Yeah, I love hearing that. So, I mean, without much further ado, let's talk about the process of bringing the book together, and ultimately, you said it was in part dedicated to your dad, and documenting the history around go-go from your period and being the 90s, I suppose, through the 2000s, late 2000s. So what did you feel like you wanted to accomplish? Tell me about the process, and what you really want to accomplish ultimately with the work.
Oh, with the book?
Yes.
Well, I'm a photographer, okay, first. And when I was working with the library to get all of my photos ready, they all had to be captioned, tagged, and curated through, thousands of clicks of my shutter over a 10-year period. And then all of a sudden, as I turned them over to the library, that we started talking about how the story would presented to go along with it. And I mentioned the History Press and approaching them, and the library said, yeah, please do that. And so I approached them, and they said yes the day after. They had been looking for somebody to do a local history book about DC Go-Go, which is what the History Press and Arcadia books do. They're able to really go to a small area and do individual books on local history. So then the question could I write a book? And I got an editor named Kate who helped me out immensely. But it was also interesting as far as the process goes. When she works with a new author, most of the work had been done in other prior projects. I had just spent 7 months with every single photo that I took in Go-Go, writing captions for it. And prior to that, because once my idea was accepted and she wrote me a contract, she said, you can get back to me, and the next step is get back to me in 90 days with your outline. And starting in 2014, I was doing presentations at PowerPoint presentations with 50 of my photos. And in that process, I had to create a story to tell with the pictures I had. And I was like, hey, Kate, that outline is already done. It's right here. Yeah. So I turned this book out in a year, whereas many of my fellow authors at the History Press take 5 to 6 years. Wow. And a lot of it was pictures. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to turn this around quickly. It was very difficult for me to figure out how I write. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big challenge. Once I accepted the fact that I pace around the house in my pajamas, all right, write a little, walk through the living room, grab something out of the fridge, take a stroll around the yard, then come back and write another paragraph. I was fighting that. Once I accepted that, the story sort of flowed.
Yeah, I like that. PowerPoint came back for the win for you. It's like, I already have this, yeah. And it almost serves as having that skeleton or what have you, and being able to fill it in. Like that seems like two parts of it, where you're doing the fill-in portion of having those captions for the photos, and then you're doing that fill-in portion of having the structure, the wireframe within that PowerPoint. And it's like, all right, here's the actual writing part.
I also had the story in my head, because when I was doing this, all of my friends who looked like me, didn't understand what I was doing. And so I was explaining them what Go-Go was and how the whole culture exists around it, that people in DC, it hides in plain sight to people from DC, but all of our graffiti culture comes out of people, out of a handful of people who wanted their names shouted out at Go-Go's. So they started tagging the city, and everybody white people remember the tags of Cool Disco Dan, but they didn't know that they were tied to this music. I didn't know that. So I learned that. So I had been telling the story in the best way for me, which is running my mouth, and then showing folks pictures.
So tell me about so folks typically think when they hear Go-Go, at least like now, what have you, when I think of Go-Go music, I think of the music, I think of the auditory part of it from that point of view. Could you describe Go-Go from your vantage point as a photographer? Like, what are the looks, what are the visual components of going to see like that music perform, the culture around it and all of that?
That's a big point in my book, because Go-Go, had I not been a deadhead, had my experience with jam bands, I really wouldn't have understood what was going on, because Go-Go is not by any means a 3-minute song that you hear on the radio. Go-Go is a live music event. And since it's been kicked around by every municipality in the DMV. It doesn't play in buildings that were in venues that were built for live music. It's played in spots that are often catering halls or restaurants, and the bands. There's not often a stage set up for them to play on. There's certainly no lighting, and the audience and the band are eye to eye together, with only things separating them is 3 or 4 monitors in the front, and there's a call and response. There's the lead talker in the band. Yeah. His job is to keep the audience generated and keep the audience involved. And he directs the band through that. If a bunch of people are not up front, they start to go back to the tables. He puts the band into the significant pocket, which is unique to Go-Go, and gets everybody back in the dancing groove. Calls out people who are in attendance and celebrating to keep everybody on their feet. It's called Go-Go because the music never stops. And Chuck, and as well as all of the musicians in the early to mid 70s, were losing gigs to discotheques where the music never stopped. And one of the DJs from that time was a guy by the name of Jazz Funk, whose mother happened to be and he was known for his vocalizing over the songs to keep the audience pumped. And meanwhile, his mother was managing a band of young teenagers at the time called Young Dynamos, which turned out to become Rare Essence. Oh. And Jazz Funk is on the mic, and he created the role of lead talker, and people pass notes back and forth to have your name shouted out at Go-Go. And this is what I call authentic Go-Go. And seeing a Go-Go band on stage at the Kennedy Center or listening to it on the radio or something like that isn't really the energy that exists there. And Greg Boyer, who's played with Parliament Funkadelic and was in Prince's band, has traveled the entire world, but he always makes it home to play many Chuck Brown gigs. He still does to this day. He wrote the foreword to my book, and he talks about traveling all over the world. But the unique thing to DC is that the audience, whatever energy you throw at the audience in DC, it throws it back. And he even talks about the fact that there's an additional band member, and that is the audience, and that's the groove. And he doesn't feel that anywhere else but here in DC.
That's beautiful. It sounds very participatory. I love that. It's, I think with the pandemic and all, right, we see like live performance in any facet, whether it's music, whether it's sports, whatever. And there were some instances where they didn't have an audience. So, if you watch a baseball game, you don't hear somebody booing or that was a bad call. You don't hear any of that. So something that's lost. So hearing that that's very integral. The people attending, going to the show are part of that. That's the thing that I think is very important. It's very important to make that distinction. So thank you for putting that out there.
Seeing a go-go band without a live audience, which I happened to see sometimes when the promoters hadn't promoted the show well, was pretty much a dull experience. It was almost pretty much a rehearsal, that energy wasn't there, and that energy is what's important. And it'll be interesting to see as Go-Go is now getting the recognition it deserves. And people are starting to look at playing now it's starting to play in other venues, has for the last couple years, where they are live music venues, and the audience is away from the isn't as close to the band, and so that how will Go-Go maintain its authenticity of the fan band relationship in that as it moves up into a different scale?
Yeah, and authenticity is huge when you're connecting not only a form of media, a form of content, a form of expression, but also it being coupled with culture. And Go-Go is inextricably connected to the culture of DC. It's DC's music. What are, in your opinion, what are some of the things that define the culture, and more pointedly, what defines the culture of DC's music? Like, what are some of those traits that you say that is what makes DC music?
Well, it would be, the pocket beat that Chuck Brown picked up from the kids playing instruments that they fashioned out of junk over in Anacostia in the old Freedmen's colony of Berry Farms, and carried it over the bridge and played on the corners for pocket change. And they developed their own beat. And I've heard professors talk about how kids have to grow up learning playing the go-go beat to be go-go drummers. They're unable to get that beat and swing to professionally trained drummers. These kids who grew up playing go-go is also played in the African American church in DC, and so a lot of times these kids, their first movement from playing junk from the dump to and shout out here, there's the Junkyard Band was one of the earliest bands to do this, and they are still playing today. But oftentimes the first time a go-go drummer sat in front of a real go-go kit, a real drum kit, was when he started playing in church. And many of the drummers, all of the drummers have church gigs too. And for a while, DJ Rico and DJ Big John, Dat Bama Be Crankin', held a breakfast at this restaurant over in Lower Prince George's County from 4:00 in the morning till 8 in the morning or 7 in the morning, because the drummers would go there, get breakfast, they'd sober up, and then they would also they wouldn't go home, fall asleep, and miss their church gigs. And that was a cultural thing. Cultural aspect, when you go to, when someone hits a home run at Nats Park, they play "Bustin' Loose" by Chuck Brown.
Nice.
Like I said, all of the graffiti was there. Go-go has its own fashion involved in it, and you can look at when folks from DC go up to New York City. Okay, people in New York City are like, those guys are from DC. There's lines of clothing that just came, drop socks and New Balance sneakers are all part of DC culture. It goes deeper than that. There's been plays now. There's been 2 plays that are musicals that were created. The Giz, which was The Wizard of Oz. That was a production that was played sold out at MGM Theater, and at Georgetown University they did Wind Me Up Maria, which was the musical The Sound of Music. Okay, where Maria is a young Black student at DC who goes to work for taking care of the kids, and she introduces the kids to go-go music, and the kids end up having all kinds of problems and subplots, and down comes Chuck Brown and talks to all of the kids, and his sons were consulted so that the actor had all the mannerisms down right. But yes, it's steeped in go-go culture. Go-go culture is steeped in DC, and people who know it, and people who don't know it, it hides in plain sight from them.
And that's one of the things that this podcast is about. Is really about highlighting culture, but also sharing culture, and through these conversations or what have you. So I really appreciate you sharing a lot of that. That's great. So I have one last real question, and then I got some rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
So, you can't get away from the rapid fire questions. Everybody gets rapid fire questions.
Okay. I'm holding on to the table here.
I was going to say, it's like the chili on a half smoke or I don't know. I'm trying to make a DC reference. I don't know. So ultimately, could you run it back and remind me how did working with the Godfather of Go-Go, the legendary Chuck Brown, come about? And is there an experience working as his photographer that really sticks out for you? Do you have a Chuck story? Yeah.
Definitely. When I shoot pictures, I often talk about being 11 feet away,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not talking about a measurement. I'm talking about a mentality of
Mm-hmm.
not interfering with the subject, and that comes from the saying of, you know, a 10-foot pole. And I like to say, when people say something to me that's controversial, I say, well, I have to get out my 11-foot pole for that, because I'm not going to touch it with my 10. But if you were to talk to me about working with subjects and capturing them nationally, I talk about pretending you're invisible and staying at 11 feet of figurative distance. So you're not in their face. They're not looking at you. They're not posing for you.
Mm-hmm.
So after I had been shooting Chuck for about a year, doing that, Chuck had a show in Hampton, Virginia, at Hampton Coliseum, where he was opening up for Parliament Funkadelic, and I got on the bus for that tour, and the band was in the back watching a movie or sleeping in the sleeper carts, and I sat up front and talked to Chuck on the 3-hour trip down there, and we shared some stories, and which are all in the preface of my book. But when the bus pulled into Hampton Coliseum, we started offloading. Chuck said to me, "I'd like you to walk with me to the stage tonight." And I was like, okay. So when it came time for the band to walk to the stage, I found Chuck and we walked to the stage. And on the way there, he was very comfortable. I'm sorry, he was very complimentary of my images, and was very pleased about it. And then as we walked to the steps, walked up those steps, and his drummer Quickfoot was hitting the cymbals, and the audience was screaming, "Wind me up, Chuck, wind me up, Chuck." We got to the top of the steps, and he stopped and took 2 steps back towards me, and he said, "Hey, Kodak," which meant he forgot my name. He said, "Do you know why you are with me tonight, and why you've been with me for the last year?" And I said, "No, Pops, I don't know." And he said, "It's very important to me. It's important to my family. And most of all, it's important to my legacy." He said, "The work you do is important to my legacy." And that was 11 years ago. And the work that I've been able to do the last 2.5 years, I feel is passing on Chuck's legacy, and also passing on the fact that, yes, he created Go-Go, but Go-Go grew from that. Chuck was often quoted as saying, "I wanted to create a sound for my band, and I created a sound for the city."
That's great. That's great. Great that you had that story. Thank you for sharing that. So that's the end of kind of the real questions, and I got some rapid fire questions, and then we'll get to shameless plugs, and we'll wrap from there.
Okay.
So rapid fire. Pretty much, you want to just go top of the head. You don't want to overthink it. So they're all over the place. Just so you know. First one. What's your favorite book?
Easily. We were just discussing that. Hell's Angels by Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson was a gonzo journalist, and he embedded himself with the Hells Angels in the 1950s, and wrote this great book. And that's what he created, called gonzo journalism. And the work that I did in Go-Go, I consider it to be gonzo photograph. When you immerse yourself into a culture and write about it, photograph it, and that's gonzo journalism. So yeah, that's my favorite book.
So next question. So you do the photography. You're a photographer. Mm-hmm. What describe your gear real quick for us. What are you shooting with?
There's a saying that your best gear is the gear that you have in front of you, that you have with you. And so, I really don't like to hang out with other photographers, because all they seem to want to talk about is gear and technology and stuff like that. And I am an old school photographer. I shoot everything manually. I actually use a 1983 Vivitar strobe that only works at 4 speeds: full, half, 3/4, full, half, a quarter, and a 30-second. Okay. I'm not into the technology of the camera. I shoot everything just like I shot in 1983 with my Nikon FM2.
Nice.
And what I have is that I don't use the computer aspects that are available in my Nikon, which right now I'm shooting a Nikon D810. But it's got a whole bunch of capabilities, and I really only know how to set the aperture, the ISO, and the shutter speed. And I have an ability to look at light that's around me and adapt my gear to it. And oftentimes it when I first walk in, I say, this can't be done. There's no light in here. And then I figure it out. And so that's what I got. My technology is really in years of doing it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that makes you flexible. When, people say, "Oh, here's the new great thing to record with." I'm like, I can get sound out of anything I need to get it from.
Right. As far as, Photoshop work, every picture I have is post-processed, but I really use the adjustments that I would do when I was, developing my own film with like this canister here, and doing in the darkroom. I crop, I adjust contrast, just a little bit of exposure, highlight, shadows, and tones. The other Photoshop stuff I can't do. I don't want to, actually. My friend said, why don't you take a course in Photoshop? And I was like, well, because I'm kind of happy with the work I get now.
Yeah. All right. So,
however, I am always striving for tone. Musicians are always striving for the tone. The tone is the holy grail to get to look for constantly.
Favorite DC venue? And there's one more after this.
Alice's Jazz and Cultural Center, which is a tiny storefront venue that has straight up old school jazz on Sunday nights, and there's no alcohol allowed, and it's from 6 to 9 p.m. and musicians love to play it because people are only there for the music.
Love it. Lastly, and this is the most controversial question: chocolate or vanilla?
I mix them together.
Love it. Love it. So there you have it, folks. I want to thank Chip Pye for coming onto the podcast. Thank you so much. And secondly, I want to invite you to plug your book, tell the fine folks where to check your website out, all of that good stuff. And again, thank you for being on this podcast.
Great. My book, DC Go-Go, 10 Years Backstage, is available from my website at www.chippyephotographer. That's Chip Pye Photographer, and my last name is just PY. So it's chippyephotographer.com. They're available signed. They're $21.99. I ship them out the day. I also have on that website limited edition Chuck Brown prints that I released when my book released too. So you can take a few minutes and check those out too. They're going to make great holiday gifts coming up.
So there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Chip Pye for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art and culture in and around your city. You just got to look for it.